Okay, right, councillors, we will open the meeting. Welcome everyone for one of our last meetings before the election. We have apologies, Councillor Casey for absence. We have Member Taipere and Member Honeck for apologies, but we have Member Hanari and I believe Glenn is coming later. Councillor Collins and Filipano for lateness on council business, and Councillor Wayne Walker for early departure to an election campaign meeting. I'll move those. Councillor Watson will second. Yeah, all those in favour? Any declarations of interest? No. Confirmation of the minutes, I'll move those. Councillor Simpson will second. All those in favour? There are 3 sets of minutes there. There are no petitions, there's no public input, but we have Lisa for local board input. So welcome Lisa from Upper Harbour Local Board.
I'm taking full advantage of Margaret's absence on holiday to make sure you don't forget Upper Harbour. So thank you for your time this morning. Today I'm actually encouraging you to support the officer's recommendations. We have worked hard after getting your advice last year that the compensation money that was received from NZTA for the Northern Corridor project needed to be reinvested on a sound sort of evidence-based approach on projects that are in our strategic documents. So I know there are many councillors around the table who have had quite disruption in their own wards from motorway projects, and so you'll appreciate just how much disruption it can cause. And this compensation is an opportunity to reinvest in our parks and open spaces and really provide compensation for the communities that have been most affected. And in our case, excuse me, the community that's been most affected is actually our community that has the least amount of voice with council, and we hear from the least. So this is a proactive approach that the local board has worked with officers on to make some real strategic investment and get some real benefit for the people who have genuinely been impacted by the project. So I urge you to support the recommendations. Just a little widely, I came and spoke to you a few weeks ago about our sustainable sports park in Scott Point, which has not quite got enough funding to get underway in November. We have added this to the list. It's clearly a strategic project, but it's slightly outside the boundaries of the actual motorway project. But what I'd urge you to sort of think a little widely, and sport is played sub-regionally, and the impact of the motorway project has impacted on codes that will play at the new sporting ground at Scott Point, whether they come from Devonport, Takapuna, the East Coast Bays or Albany. So I urge you to not rule out on that one just because it's slightly off the geographic track, but I'm sure officers will speak to that. Our local board has given a lot of consideration to how best mitigate the effects of this project and sort of make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, which the disruption being caused is real, but there will be betterment in the end. So this will go some way to making better quality open space for the people that have been impacted. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I urge you to support the recommendations. Thank you.
Lisa, can you just tell us where the hockey people have gone? Is that outside your ward?
No, they haven't. They've moved around the corner.
Oh,
so
okay.
Where the Northern Corridor is going takes out 2 of the turfs from Harbour Hockey. Harbour Hockey have moved around the corner in the same park to where the Rosedale Pony Club was. So they will actually move on to that site in January with their new world-class facility. It's looking amazing. The pony clubs are happy at their new, certainly the best pony club facilities in Auckland, if not the North Island, perhaps not Taupo. They've got the National Equestrian Centre there, but so hockey haven't moved very far, but they are being resolved. We do still have some issues with the remnant land there, where Watercare have said that they want the land, but they haven't been specific, and as far as I'm understanding, those negotiations haven't progressed. So if they don't want it, we've got some ideas.
Okay. Councillor Watson.
Mr. Chair, and yeah, no, I would say it is quite impressive the speed with which NZTA move in these projects. They don't muck around. Sorry, Lisa, I just want, and well done to you and the local board for all the work you put into this. I've just got a question, however, on this kind of, balancing that you're trying to do, this quid pro quo, and it but basically goes to Rook Reserve, which of course serves quite a big population in Unsworth there, that lose quite a big, big nearly 6,000 square metres. Are you reasonably confident with all this, balancing the local board's trying to do that, you'll be able to really compensate some of these communities that have lost quite big chunks of open space?
Yeah, Rook Reserve is actually a really good example of where we've worked collaboratively with NZTA. So the final compensation for Rook Reserve and the Rosedale landfill haven't yet been determined, so that will be further funding that could be allocated to other projects. But Rook Reserve itself is, where they've put in some hard fill for staging their vehicles, we're turning that into a court space. We're putting in adult fitness equipment and a scooter track. So we've actually, the land that's left, because there's a massive stormwater pond that's gone in, the land that's left is going to be much more usable than the land that was lost. So that's the approach we've taken, is that if we're going to have less, what's there has to be functional. And that's also adjacent to the underpass that's being upgraded, which is a connectivity to the park where the hockey is. Sorry, I'm pointing like you know where I'm talking about. Right.
Councillor Walker.
Just looking at the locations that you're advocating for the money to be spent, would it be fair to say that a number of these locations quite obviously benefit Upper Harbour, but because of their proximity to the motorway and so on, they're also going to cater for a larger area? So
Absolutely.
they'll be drawing on quite a catchment, which is a good thing.
Absolutely. The walking and cycling trails probably have a mainly local benefit for Rosedale Park, but it is a sub-regional sports park, and so we do have people coming and playing. It's the regional softball park, so we do have people coming from all over to play softball there. We've also got football, and people travel around the city to play football. The Caribbean Sports Field is currently just a soil field. It's going to be upgraded, it's going to have lights. We acquired the land from the Ministry of Education, but we didn't have any money to develop it. Currently that's used by Glenfield football and Greenhithe football. So once it's been made a bit more weatherproof and we get more training hours out of it, the benefit is well beyond Upper Harbour. And as I said, the Scott Point Sustainable Park will be a sub-regional facility for football and for baseball.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. There's nothing else, so John will move and Wayne will second. Sorry, Councillor Watson will move and Councillor Walker will second the vote of thanks. All those in favour? Right, we have Wendy and Paul, I believe, not Katarana, and we have Rob Cairns and Ross Tucker in attendance if need be. Welcome.
Good morning. Just following on.
Sorry, I should say there's no extraordinary business, Paul. Sorry, I should have said that before. So we'll note that in the minutes and sorry, Paul.
Just following on the introduction from the local board, so we worked closely with them in terms of helping prioritise projects, and just noting there were 7 service assets that were compulsory acquired by NZTA or parts thereof. Worked with the local board to help prioritise that reinvestment back into the community. They've identified development of walking and cycling trails in and around Rosedale Park, as well as development of park assets for the Caribbean Sports Field, Unsworth Reserve and Scotts Point. And as Lisa said in her introduction, those sports fields have a wide catchment area and will serve the sort of broader, beyond this Upper Harbour region, but there's investment that will go back into those areas immediately affected by the loss of those service assets. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, I'm assuming Councillor Watson will move and Councillor Walker will second, and we have Councillor Darby with a question.
Thanks, Chair. Just when we, as Chair of the Planning Committee, I was involved with all the negotiations on the Northern Corridor Improvements Project, and we got the busway over the line when it wasn't in the mix initially. But we questioned at that time that we knew that we were going to lose a lot of land. And one of the things that I put was the valuations on the disposal or the acquisition of land by NZTA was always going to be on the value of the land lost, not on the cost of the land to be acquired. And we always knew, and Lisa was at the table, Margaret Miles, consistently saying, we're going to wear this further down the track unless we negotiate an outcome that takes into account the acquisition of land rather than the disposal of land. So can you tell me, where did we get to on that? Because when I calculate this, a receipt of 6 million and a little for 3.7 hectares, that equates to a miserly $160 per metre. And we know, Lisa, you cannot acquire land within QE of $160 a metre. So where did we get to in terms of striking a deal that was about replacement rather than disposal and the value of that disposal?
So through the chair, this is just a component of the negotiations that have been underway with NZTA. So this is really to offset some of the sort of slivers of land from these service assets that were help facilitate the development of the motorway. Then there was a broader agreement about getting comparable areas of land as compensation, particularly for that loss of the Rosedale hockey area. So as part of that negotiation, what we have secured is a property in Bringham's Creek of comparable size, which there was an additional acquisition that we made to boost it up to 10 hectares, but we've got comparable land as part of that broader package of compensation for the loss of land to NZTA for this project. So this is one component of it. The other component was that the Crown provided us some other land as compensation for the loss. And as the member from the Upper Harbour Local Board noted, we still have some ongoing negotiations about compensation for Rook Reserve as well as Rosedale landfill. So we haven't been compensated for those at this point.
I'm aware of the big deals like the relocation of hockey, Rosedale, and Green Hive Pony Club. I'm aware of those other relocations. I'm probably looking at these little bits, these strips, and that are identified that have, lessened the ability to, use a reserve area to its fullest. So you're confident that we've still got negotiations ahead of us to ensure that we get the very best outcomes in terms of place. Yes, that's really important, but also the best financial outcomes. So we've still got negotiating ahead of us, and we are firm in our desire to deliver a good place and financial outcome.
Through the chair, that's correct. I'm confident that we do have considerable room for further negotiation with NZTA, and I believe in terms of our approach to this compensation that we're getting reasonably good value for money for ratepayers in this respect. So previously, most of the where land's been compulsorily acquired, we've been financially compensated sort of based on assessments of the land value. So our negotiation position this time was more about getting comparable land and then financial compensation on top of that.
Councillor Watson.
Paul, perhaps just in light of that question, it might be worthy of a comment for the other councillors in terms of the wider quid pro quo that is being delivered with these negotiations or deals, compensations have been struck with NZTA in terms of the quality of the facilities that are being delivered and the speed with which they're delivered. And I think particularly of the BMX course, I think of the structure that's going for the hockey at Rosedale, and I think of what the Pony Club ended up without at Greenhive. Could you just make just perhaps a brief comment on really how well the council's doing out of all these arrangements with NZTA?
So through the chair, Mace Ward just sent through some, so he's the sponsor of the compensation agreement between council and the NZTA, and he sent through some updates in terms of the progress with those, the BMX tracks, the 2 pony clubs, and the new high performance hockey centre, and both of those are on track in terms of their delivery. We understand that the hockey centre will be delivered in December for hockey to take over in January. BMX facility has been delivered, and the 2 pony clubs are very close to delivery. And in terms of quality, I think it would be fair to say that the quality of those facilities is better than we had previously.
Paul, can you just explain to us, we're using the terminology compensation funding. How much of a precedent is this, and have there been previous other compensation funding scenarios? And what is the criteria for them?
So through the chair, from time to time we lose, and it's mostly public open space assets, we lose them to NZTA as they widen traffic corridors. In the past, generally, as I explained in response to a question from Councillor Darby, we've seek to get compensation based on land values. Sometimes we don't agree with NZTA in terms of the value of public open space. They tend to negotiate quite hard and don't perhaps appreciate its value as much as we might do. From time to time we've had to go to the Land Valuation Tribunal because we haven't been able to agree. But with respect to this particular situation, I think generally we've had reasonably good negotiations. We haven't been too far apart. And in terms of our approach as looking at compensation, both in terms of land as well as financial compensation, as well as the delivery of replacement assets, my feeling is that this arrangement has worked well for council.
It was a poorly worded question on my part. I'm probably meaning the fact that this has been effectively ring-fenced as compared to going into the consolidated fund.
So through the chair, what took place here was generally the loss of what we would call service assets. So those were parks that were being used and enjoyed by the community. So under the service optimisation approach, there is a policy that where there is disposal, and this was a forced disposal of those assets, then that money would be ring-fenced for reinvestment back into the community. And as part of that service optimisation proposal, it just requires that the reinvestment is supported by some sort of strategic document, whether that be a local board plan, or in this instance, it's the open space network plan that was adopted.
That's fine. I just wanted all the councillors to understand that.
So these projects were identified in that open space network plan, and then the local board has gone through an exercise to prioritise of their list of 20 odd projects, which ones to bring forward for reinvestment of that $6 million.
All good. Councillor Darby.
Speaking to it, and I have no doubt that to date we've got a good outcome, good quality with the relocation of facilities. It's not picture perfect though. There is, again Lisa, you know this pretty well, there is a shortage of grazing, and you cannot have equestrian operating really well unless you have good grazing ground, and that ground has to grow grass through as much of the year as possible. And we have got fewer members at those clubs that can now graze close to the equestrian facility. That's a fact. That is a lesser outcome. Though, when you look at the physical infrastructure, it looks fantastic, but fewer will be able to participate, maybe others that can truck horses in on their floats, etc. The hockey outcome is looking really good. But none of this occurred because of just hands off. This all occurred through the working party that put its foot down, and remember Hannah Ray, you participated in that, on a regular basis, and others, we put our foot down and said, the history is that NZTA only deliver good projects when they go to a hearing and the submissions from council and the public are what makes the project long-lasting, positive for the community. And we had to put our foot down. And if you look around Auckland at every opportunity where the NZTA historically have operated, where the outcomes have been good, they have only been through the submission process, not because NZTA offered it at the outset. And you look at the beautiful bridge, pedestrian bridge across the motorway, the fact that there is a busway being extended, that was not in the original proposal. It was this council that put its foot down, and I wrote to the then minister saying the busway should have been in the proposal. And it eventually was. In fact, it made the motorway project even cheaper because it's a staging platform. So my point is that we've got a way to go, and I'm taking this opportunity to say we need to keep negotiating harder, because it concerns me, and hopefully the culture of NZTA has changed, and I'll give them credit there, but they will fight for the least because they are interested in holding as much budget in their own account. We have to fight for the best for the local community, and I thank the team for doing that.
Councillor Hills.
I know, just a quick comment, really. I think this is great. The facilities that are already being built and what is coming is fantastic. But obviously, like Councillor Darby and others have said, this is largely a payback or trying to make things better because of another important infrastructure piece coming through that area. So we've got to keep in mind that although this is fantastic, that it is, a lot has been taken away from this specific community in the area of open space and green spaces especially. But just want to congratulate the local board, especially Lisa White and others. It wasn't an easy process. There was a lot of division. There was a lot of community upset and a long time to get it right. And it could have ended up that NZTA just ploughed through and got on with it without. So I think it was very difficult for the local board and the local community at the time, but they really pulled through and came together, and this, in the end, will be legacy projects from this infrastructure project. So just want to congratulate everyone, but especially the local board, who really had to make some pretty hard calls and show leadership during that time, and I know it wasn't easy even between them, so thank you.
Mayor Goff.
Just a very brief comment, Mr. Chairman. I had the privilege of being with Lisa at a couple of the openings and with councillors. BMX track, absolutely world class. They're delighted with it. I declined the opportunity, as did councillors Watson and Walker, to trial it. The Pony Club, again, I looked at their old facilities and I looked at their new facilities, and wow, they think they've got something really special there, and they have. And I also attended one of the international hockey matches over there, and they're pretty happy with what's happening, as Councillor Darby pointed out. So I just want to add my congratulations to the local board, to the councillors that were involved, and to the officers. I think we've got a great result in new facilities that are totally world class, as well as a transformational Northern Corridor once it's completed. Yeah, I acknowledge there's disruption, but whenever you're going to have a major project development, you're going to get disruption. The important thing is what comes out the other end. And what we're getting out the other end is far better transportation connections and 3 world-class sporting facilities. So well done, great result.
Councillor Watson.
Sorry, just to finish off, the Mayor's said everything, but even in terms of the way the disruptions handled has been very impressive. So basically the flow down through that, that heavily congested corridor is working just the same as it was before, and similarly along the highway there. So with that, along with their consultation, I think Lisa would probably agree that the kind of public angst has largely dissipated, and in the place they're seeing these superb facilities get delivered at speed. So again, congratulations to the officers involved, and also to the local board for their preeminent position in this too. Thank you.
All right, well, we have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Wendy. We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? There's no one against. Excellent. Right, we move on to item 9 and we welcome up the team, which is led by Edward, or Ed, I'm not sure. I think his wife tells me it's Edward, but he says it's Ed. And we, and we have Claire and Sarah. Councillors, clearly this is the culmination of many months of work, about 9 or 10 months of work, and we're at this stage of we've got agreement from all of the CCOs, and as Ed will go through and indicate, he and the team are pretty happy that everything has been met to their satisfaction. So, yeah.
Good, that's better. I thought I'd just start with a quick presentation about where we're at in this process, and also do a little bit of a look back at where we've come from over the last 3 years with the Statement of Intent process. So it's only 5 slides, so I won't take too much of your time. Just to start, a reminder about the purpose of Statements of Intent that's set out in the Local Government Act. It's about council as shareholders having strategic influence over our CCO partners. It's about getting the CCOs to set out their activities for the 3 years to come, but in particular for the year to come. And it's about providing a platform for measuring their performance. The process started back in late November, and that was actually a slightly innovative thing for this process. We actually came to you and sought specific resolutions about the themes and specific actions that should be included in the letters of expectation. We hadn't done that before, and I think that was quite a valuable thing to do because it gave a good basis for the Mayor when he started preparing those letters. They were sent in December 2018, and the next step is for the CCOs to spend the next few months drafting their initial statement of intent and providing that to us by the start of March. As staff, we then review the drafts against the letters of expectations to check how well those expectations have been delivered in the statement of intent, and we brought our proposals for shareholder feedback back to you on 16 April, and you'll remember we had quite a long discussion that day, which then fed into formal shareholder comments that were sent at the end of April. After that, the staff work, that's us and the finance staff in particular, work really closely with the CCOs to ensure that the comments have been incorporated appropriately, and ultimately we receive the final SOIs on the 30th of June, and the changes that you see in those final SOIs really reflect both the shareholder comments, the annual budget that councillors have signed off, and any new information that's arisen since March. And examples of that sort of thing are that, for example, Auckland Transport's raised some of its targets to reflect just the reality of some of the success they're having with things like patronage. As I say, we review the final statements of intent together with our finance colleagues, and the result of that reconciliation is in the attached table to the report. We consider that this year the CCOs have been very diligent in the way that they've responded to the shareholder comments delivered to them. They've genuinely tried really hard to do what they've been asked to do by the council. And that's resulted in the recommendation you've got there in front of you, which is that we don't consider that any formal modifications are required to the statements of intent this year. That said, we are seeking 2 delegations for finalising the statements of intent of ATED and MEMIT. That's Mangere Mountain Education Trust. ATED just need to finalise some of their targets with information that's still to come in, and MEMIT just needs to finalise things because they've had some disruption on their board. So the key at this stage of the process is that we're looking for any shareholder comments that haven't been adequately dealt with, and ensuring consistency with council's strategy and budgets. We're not looking for new issues to be introduced at this stage or performance issues that you may have with the CCOs. There's another opportunity, of course, coming up 17 September to look at the Q4 and annual results. As I said, I'd just like to have a look at where we've come from the last 3 years before we take questions. From our perspective in the CCO governance team, there has been an improvement in the statements of intent and the way that this process operates. So I guess the question is, what have we been doing as staff and you as elected members to make that happen? I think what we've seen is a more active use of the letters of expectation process to influence strategy and activities. When I joined council back in 2016, I think the letters of expectation tended to be more in the way of laundry lists of preferred items that council would like to see included, and I think they're far more strategic now than they used to be. And I think that's flowed into the quality of the statements themselves. The measures, of course, are refined constantly, and we've had another LTP to do that. And as council matures and we have a better idea of some of the, for example, transport models that we're using, that flows into the measures. I think we're also improving the way we use quarterly reporting to interrogate performance of CCOs. We're on a good schedule now of actually bringing the CCOs in every 3 months. We've got a new template that we're using, and I think some of the conversations are really improving, and I think we saw that particularly with RFA last time round, who came with a very good presentation, which certainly I thought was an improvement on what we'd seen from them previously. We've got almost a full suite now of group policies that drive quality decision making across the group, and we're considering the final one of those later in this meeting. I've got a bullet point there about more active management. What I mean by that is, as staff, we are working very closely at times with the CCOs to make sure that these shareholder comments and the letters of expectations are met. I think all that's very good. I acknowledge that there's always more that can be done. The statements of intent are never perfect. And so we do have the statement of intent process review that's ongoing, and that will bring with it some options for continuous improvement and making sure that the statements get better over time. A final point I'd make is that I think there's only so much you can do through the formal documents, and at the end of the day, there's healthy relationships between the council and the CCOs and their boards that are really critical to driving good performance and ensuring that their performance matches our strategic priorities. And of course, it's those healthy relationships that will also help attract high quality candidates to both the boards and senior management of our CCOs. And just to actually ground it in a bit of reality, a couple of examples where I think we can see improvements. First of all, with RFA in their statement of intent, if I compare what you've got in front of you today with where we were at a couple of years ago, there's far more detailed financial information being provided. You can't see it, but on that table we've actually got breakdowns of different capital expenditure and renewals for different business units and even facilities that RFA has. That's Appendix A of their statement of intent. They've revised their strategic themes since March just to better align them with council direction. And there is a really clear commitment for the first time from RFA on page 16 of their statement of intent to really work with council on the big decisions, which I know is something that councillors have been really calling for. And speaking personally as someone leading the Cultural Heritage Review, they're playing a really constructive and cooperative role in that process. And the final one, before we turn it over to you, just in terms of Auckland Transport's statement of intent, it's got a very detailed strategic front end this year, which I think reflects council's priorities and direction that we've been asking for far better than it has in the 4 previous statements of intent that I've been part of. There's a detailed work program which was requested through the shareholder comments, especially in particular in regard the safety program, the integrated corridors, which is now called Connected Communities, and also the walking and cycling program. And there's some quite long and quite specific commitments to better engagement with council, which obviously was the subject of a recent workshop we had with them. You can find that on pages 11 and 16 and 17. We've obviously got a discussion on Thursday at Governing Body about the Governance Framework Review, which is related to this issue. So I think there is that clear commitment there. Obviously, work still remains to be done. I'm not saying it's by any means sorted, but I think the statement of intent this year provides a really good platform for improving that engagement. Finally, as I say, there's some new measures that they've put, new targets that they've put in, and that was something that Auckland Transport initiated themselves in the areas, I suppose you could call them the 3 Ps. They've increased their patronage targets for public transport, their punctuality targets, and they are actively increasing their road productivity target as well. So I think it's really a credit to Shane and his team, the way that they've showed a real willingness to deliver through the statement of intent this year. So look, that's all I've got to say. Again, I just reiterate, I think that the CCOs as a whole have done a good job this year at really trying to respond to what you've asked for, and we do recommend that there's no need for any formal modification of the statements of intent. Thank you.
Any comments from your partners in crime up there? No? All good, right. Councillor Holes.
I've just got a small one. It's water care on page 83 of ours and 12 of the report, and it's a really small issue. So number 3 at the bottom, where we talk about customer and stakeholder relationships. In the area above, we talk about the development of the water strategy with Healthy Waters and Urimu and other partners, and yet then in stakeholder relationships we just talk about water care will continue to collaborate with Healthy Waters and Auckland Transport to develop Auckland's water strategy, but they're actually working with Mana Whenua, with our research unit, with other parts of council. So I wonder if we could just change that to that we'll continue to collaborate with Auckland Council and other interests to develop the water strategy, because that's been one of the strengths of the water strategy, is that it is working widely.
Yes, we can feed that later.
Thank you.
Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Well done, team. It's a long process, and I've often been critical of the process. That I think it's a little bit old-fashioned and staged, so I'll ask for a comment on that. Ed and team, I know the legislation set out that we have to do things this way, but it seems to be last century rather than modern best business practice in this day and age with alliance type models. A comment on that. The second question is around the KPIs. And in all fairness to any business, the KPI has to be set only on things that they can directly affect as compared to things they cannot change or cannot affect.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what the question was there, Deputy Mayor.
So let's say you take or a transport one, then you just put a KPI that says you must reduce congestion to a certain level. But in all fairness to AT, they can't necessarily make that happen because they don't control the numbers of people coming into the country, the number of cars, the motorway network or rail network. So there's a degree of ambiguity there that I think needs to be tested through setting those key performance indicators.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct, Deputy Mayor, and I'm sure AT would agree, especially if I think about an issue like climate change, is where they particularly will come back to us and say that there is a limit to how much they can affect emissions because of the issues like population growth and the choices that people make when they purchase vehicles and so forth. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Did you also want to comment on the statement of intent process?
Is there an opportunity to do something about that particular process going forward, or is it
Sarah will answer that.
I'll just talk to that. I'm leading the work on the SOI review. I think there's an opportunity, certainly through advocacy, on this, because it would require legislative change, given, as you said, the particular constraints we have, where these timeframes do not align to our annual planning and budgeting timeframes. It often means there's a bit of a disconnect. I think the CCOs actually manage it pretty well, but it does pose some challenges, especially when things have to get through their boards and then to us. So I certainly think, and when we come back to you on some of these options for improvement, I think advocacy to central government around some of this could be, or some flexibility would be welcomed and something we could advocate for.
Thanks, Sarah. I wholeheartedly agree. And also, these are a lot better than what they used to be. I only know from last term. I presume that's what was improved on the term before. So they are heading in the right direction, but I just don't think they are fit for purpose in this modern day and age.
Councillor Walker, but no doubt it won't be a question about RFA because they've done what you've been asking them to do.
In point of fact, that is not the case, Mr Chair. And I do note that in this statement of intent, and I am looking at RFA, that there are some good words here. On page 181, will continue to demonstrate value for money across all expenditure, provide transparency on operating expenditure, and a strong focus on managing sensitive expenditure. And the critical words that I'm looking at there are around transparency on operating expenditure, value for money. And then if I look at approach to governance, act in accordance with the CCO governance manual and so on. And if I look at page 184, yes, it is useful to see a breakdown in the renewals across a number of the stadiums, specifically Mount Smart, QBE and Western Springs. Having said that, Mr Chair, because of the sensitive expenditure, and in particular I'm referring to, let's take an example, the 91 million that they're proposing for a New Zealand cricket facility at Western Springs, which may never happen. I mean, that is still a possibility, and the shift of Speedway, which may never happen, and the consequent impact on Collindale Park. From my perspective, in terms of interpreting these words, I'm looking for cost and revenue and capital expenditure across those stadiums and other parts of the group, and I'm not getting that. And as it goes to business cases and plans, I'm also not receiving the material that I need to the degree that I require to exercise decision making, and I would suggest this council. And I think that some of the information that we've received on some projects may well have been quite misleading, and I don't want to go there.
So these are comments, Councillor Walker, not a question, are they? And that's okay. That's okay, by the way.
My concern is that the words are fine, but they need to be applied and carried out. And the test for me is when a councillor or a group of councillors require information that they actually get it. And I'm finding continuing difficulty in that respect. So I just want to put that on the table.
Okay, Ed, so as Councillor Walker pointed out, those examples he gave are hypothetical at the moment, so there is no business case and there is little information. So, but when, if they do come about next year, next LTP, then there's clearly more information required. However, item 10, which we're moving on to, may start to deal with that, which is a case of business cases. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I've got two questions. The first one is actually for the Mayor, because you've done a great job, Ed, and the second one is for you. So the first one to the Mayor, because my second question was, how has our reporting from CCOs improved this term from previous councils? And I think, Your Worship, Ed's done quite a good job saying some of the, this more detailed work that we've done around that. So my question to you is, are we doing something where we can say, because people on the street have a lot of concern about our CCOs, that although it's not perfect and we will still work towards that, we've done a better job at tightening up the reporting back, or the control, for want of a better word, than previous councils? That's my question to you first. Are we saying we're going to talk about it?
Yeah, I think Ed's outlined, and he's looked at it much more closely probably than anybody else around this table, the way in which that reporting process has improved, become more specific, become harder edged, the opportunity to have the quarterly meetings and the annual report meeting. If we don't hold the CCOs to account, then the responsibility comes back around this table, because the framework is there. And what we've done with the statements of intent, I remember looking at them before I came into this place thinking, well, that's a bit of a waffle, but what does it actually mean? The greater specificity of it, I think, really improves it. But when we put something in a statement of intent, doesn't mean to say that it's automatically delivered. And I look closely at this report on Auckland Transport and its communication requirements, and the requirements are right, the delivery wasn't. But you know better than any other councillor, Councillor Simpson, that actually having got a whack around the ears from us, from you and I, AT has now gone back. It started that process again, working closely with the residents, the two Residents Association and the Business Association, with a proper working group, and it's now doing it in the right way. So a statement of intent is a bit like a constitution. It sets out the framework, but we've got to make sure that is delivering. And I think Auckland Transport learned something of a lesson from that. But I think there's still more work to be done, and Sarah, look forward to the stuff that you get through on the Statement of Intent review. And I've announced in a different context a review, a wider review, because I believe that responsibility and accountability are critical requirements. In fact, that's one of the requirements that we on a different committee, the Appointments and Performance Review, are looking at in terms of the appointments that we are making. And any of these bodies, some of them have in the past liked to believe that they were separate kingdoms, but they are funded by public money, tax and by rates, and therefore they have to be publicly accountable. But that's our role. Let's see if we can get a better framework, maybe including a change in the legislation, but we already have in place, as Ed has pointed out, the mechanisms by which we can hold them to account. And you, Councillor, I think moved a series of recommendations last time that I seconded, because I thought that that produced a greater level of accountability from Auckland Transport.
Thank you. My second question, is on quite specifically on Auckland Transport, and it's on congestion. So the front page of yesterday's Herald had us sitting in traffic 85 hours per year. And as you know, one of the resolutions that I put up on Auckland Transport was around congestion. And I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's comments, because I think that there are things that they can do and there are things that maybe they can't. But at the end of the day, my question to you, Ed, is how does this SOI give Aucklanders confidence that AT will report on reducing congestion across Auckland when it only references, from my reading, quarterly reporting on 30 urban routes as part of arterial productivity?
Through the Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, as you say, the fundamental measure in the Statement of Intent and through our quarterly reporting at the moment is that measure of arterial productivity on the 30 urban routes. Of course, congestion is probably best seen as an overall picture, and I think as a council what we've done is shifted to a situation where we focus on not so much the movement of vehicles, but the number of people that are moving around, and that's where the whole picture of measures around the number of people on public transport and walking and cycling and so forth is also important. I acknowledge perhaps that it doesn't have the focus that might be wanted from Auckland Transport on congestion, and perhaps that's something that we could take up with them through their quarterly reporting, so that you get the kind of visibility that you would like.
So just following a supplementary, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair. So Ed, look, that was the intent of the resolution. So yes, if you could just pass that on, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, I'll have a conversation with my colleagues over at Auckland Transport.
Meg, off you.
Yeah. I think the question's a good one, Councillor Simpson, but what that headline, you know what the media does, but what that headline ignores is, I've got the AA congestion report in my hand. Here's the first key point for last year. After rampant growth between 2013 and 2016, congestion in Auckland is holding steady. Yep. Quote last night, and the Deputy Mayor was with me at the forum run by the AA, from Barney Irvine from the AA, holding congestion steady is a good result given the growth of the city's population by around 40,000 a year. So let's be clear, congestion is a problem. Let's also be clear that because we've increased ATAP by 50%, we've actually put in place the mechanisms that after a time lag will deliver on that. but I agree that we need to have regular reporting on it. But just refer you to the Auckland Transport Monthly indicators, because that sets out a lot of the information that you might be looking for. We can hold AT partly to account for that, but of course it depends on how much money we vote them, how much money they get from New Zealand Transport Authority, and a whole lot of other things that we're doing, because when the congestion forecast is about, hey, it's going to get worse, it ignores things like this committee has made decisions on structure plans that when we develop a new housing estate in Drury or Warkworth, we also develop an industrial estate, so not unlike Pocono, people don't have to travel more. It ignores the fact that 29% of the new houses that were built that were consented in the last figures for, I think, May, were actually within 1.5 kilometres of an arterial route. So people are making those decisions. We're changing the way we live. We're changing the way we walk and work and build. I just think that we shouldn't get carried away with a headline. Yes, we have a problem. Are we ignoring that problem? Of course not. We're doing a whole lot of things, but Auckland Transport is only one part of the solution, so you can't put it all on Auckland Transport to say reduce congestion. They've got to work within the context that we create for them.
All right, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just two things. One is around road maintenance, and it's good to see there is a measure, road assets in acceptable condition, that they're actually measuring that now, which is probably one of the biggest issues that people complain about. So they've set it at 95. What it says, it's based on asset management plans. Is that, I guess we'll see whether that's achievable or not, but I actually don't think there's been enough emphasis on road maintenance, because yes, we have to have a focus on public transport. Yes, we need to have a focus on cycleways, etc. But our road maintenance doesn't support the majority of cyclists that have to go on the road. So I think there's, maybe not now, but I think there's really got to be a lot more emphasis on the maintenance. It's just not being done well. And we look at things like the smooth ride measurement. In rural's 92 and urban's 81, and I just don't get why it's okay for 20% of road surfaces to not be okay. You know, so I'm just not quite understanding why the difference and why it's so low. That's page 67 on that value for money. We talk about, where is it? Road maintenance standards measured by smooth travel. Because you can just see everywhere where we're not doing road, the maintenance is not being done, even when you request it a year down the track and it's just not done. So I'm trying to understand the differences with road assets in acceptable condition and road maintenance standards, and why one's quite low and one's high.
Through the chair, I can't speak to exactly why the measures are set exactly at the percentages that they are, but what I can say is that on 7th of August you've got a workshop coming up with Auckland Transport with the specific topic around road maintenance contracts being included on it. So I think you've got a really good opportunity in a few weeks to ask those questions from the people who will know the answers.
Yeah, joy out of that. And the other one is around, where is it? Sorry. It's around the northwest, of course, that's what I'm going to talk about. In terms of working with ATAP to deliver the renewal, it's page 58, not renewal, to deliver 58 north, northwest and southern. So continue working with NZ Transport Agency to progress northwestern rapid transit corridor. I guess and there doesn't seem to be a lot of KPIs matching it, because what we just don't hear. We just don't hear what's happening. And if we look at every other area, it's got fantastic transport hubs, it's got the fast, frequent, reliable network, and the Northwest doesn't. And so I just don't see any progress other than some sort of promise 10 years out that we might get something from the government. And that's why we voted for the petrol tax, and we're getting nothing. So that's my concern, that doesn't show in the, or can you point to me where it shows in the KPIs how, you know, when you've got here, this is what you want them to do, where in the KPIs does it show it's going to happen, something's going to happen? How are we measuring that?
There isn't a KPI that matches a specific achievement of these progress with these specific projects. With these specific sort of projects, what we need to do is either ask Auckland Transport through quarterly reporting, or I could probably undertake to seek some further information from Shane and his team about the progress of that project and come back to you on it, because I think we simply can't provide KPIs for every single project through the statement of intent. The KPIs need to be at that level above, where we measure things like the number of people travelling and so on. But Councillor, I'm happy to go and find out further information for you on
I don't think it should be up to you. They should be reporting to us. But I guess that's, yeah, it's just not acceptable to me that we can have a goal here, I guess you'd say, to do that, and you say, oh, there's several areas, and you report back, oh, it's happening in those areas, but it's one part of it is just not happening. And to let that basically cross-subsidise the action and say, yes, something's happening in that bigger level, but then it just doesn't happen in one part of it, and so, but stand on the work in the other areas. So I think that's something we'll bring up in the workshop. Thank you.
Right, now councillors, I'm asking to see if we can get the workshop, which was set for 1:30, brought forward to possibly 11, if we can pull it all off, or 15:15 or 11:30. So I have Councillor Stewart, Councillor Hills, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bartley to speak on this. Okay, so I have Councillor Stewart, Fletcher, Bartley and Darby on this particular topic, and then we have the one item afterwards.
Right.
And Councillor Watson, so Councillor Stewart.
Who's going first?
You're first.
I'm first, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Just on the quarterly reports, can we in the future, next term, if we're all around the table, can we make sure that when we have the quarterly reports that maybe we only have 2 or 3 CCOs that come and report to us one day, and then we do the same, so we can give them better opportunity for us to have a good discussion with them, because the last time they were here, by the end of the day, there was only 4 of us here, and it wasn't really, and even for the 4 of us that were here, it wasn't very, it was embarrassing to be here when there were people that had done a lot of work and effort to come here to present and to hopefully get some good questions, and there was nobody here. But I think it's too much having all of them coming on the one day. So if you only had, say, 2 one time, 2 another time, I think we can probably do it a lot better justice. Thank you.
Yeah, your comments to me after the last meeting, when there were only 4 of us, I think there was well noted. Yeah. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I also add my thoughts in terms of the improvements that we are progressively seeing in terms of greater specificity and making this, I'm sorry, did I pronounce it wrong for you? I apologise. I welcome that, because I think that gives a little more substance, sorry, I'm really struggling with words today, substance for us to be able to work towards. May I ask just how your relationship and that with AT has been with with NZTA, because there has been a bit of ambiguity within NZTA. So I'd like to come to the point that the Deputy Mayor was making around, we can't put KPIs forward unless they're ones that AT can have some measure of control. So what and how has the work program been with NZTA as we've worked up towards this document in its draft form now?
I have to say I don't have any relationship with New Zealand Transport Agency. That would be a question we'd need to direct to the transport strategy staff. If potentially they do, our team doesn't have any interaction with NZTA.
But what commentary have you had from them as you have progressed this work?
we haven't had any contact with NZTA about the Auckland Transport Statement of Intent.
Okay, no, that's fine. I appreciate that. So there has been a body of work that has been presented, and Councillor Simpson and the Mayor have made reference to it in terms of the Automobile Association. The point for me would not be reduce congestion, because I think there's a measure of unrealism within that as we're working forward. It's really about maintaining and not seeing it further deteriorate. So I'm interested in, you're not wanting any new subjects being incorporated today, and I appreciate that. But where are the opportunities for us to explore this in a little bit more depth? Those things that we do want to put out there in terms of just maintaining or no further deterioration with congestion, the types of measures that might actually go into that and the sort of details, because a reasonable KPI might be that we just maintain or see no further deterioration in the level of congestions that we have. Given the forecast, given the projections that we've got of population growth, given the forecasts around car ownership and so forth, how might we give effect to that in a meaningful way, bearing in mind that we do want some specifics, that we can actually find some measures, and that might serve as a useful catalyst on other work, such as congestion charging, whether or not AT should be looking at some of that body of work, whether they should be looking at the timing of the implementation of some of these bigger projects. So it would be interesting to get your commentary on that, Edward.
I think the answer to that question, Councillor, is all the normal processes that you as councillors have to influence the direction of Auckland Transport, and that obviously begins with quarterly reporting. It'll go into the next statement of intent process, where there's an opportunity to ask them to focus on different, perhaps different emphasis for the next coming year. Of course, probably the most important opportunity is the next long-term plan that will start next year. And with any long-term plan, there's a fundamental relook at what the measures should be for each of the CCOs. Obviously, you have workshop opportunities often several times throughout the year with Auckland Transport, so I think that's a really good opportunity to influence what kind of information they're bringing to you with. And obviously there's the statutory processes that Auckland Transport itself leads, such as the Regional Land Transport Plan, where we have a role in that as well, and commenting on what they're planning. So I think it's all those statutory processes, and especially the long-term plan.
Chairman, I guess I would like to see some measure going into the future that we see no further. It's about maintaining and no further deterioration on the issue of congestion on those key arterials. I'm just wondering what your recommendation might be if I was wanting to see that being advanced. How would you suggest to me that that could be best achieved?
I'm actually going to throw that back to Ed.
I think what we can already see in terms of those key arterials is that the focus that we have given Auckland Transport is not so much, as I said earlier, the number of vehicles that drive on those arterials, but increasing the number of people that can travel on them by any means. And that's why we have a productivity measure rather than a measure of the number of vehicles. And I think that reflects just the focus that this council's had over the last 3 years on people movement rather than vehicle movement. As I said earlier, we could explore with Auckland Transport some other measures if you want to. But congestion's a notoriously difficult thing to measure, and so look, I probably ought to stop there. It's I'm getting out of my depths.
No, I appreciate that. But from my ward and my perspective, it is entirely frustrating to me that we have stalled on something so important as the light rail initiative. And if you're looking at that productivity measure that you refer to, rather than just, cars on roads, at what point do all of these add to the weight of the right decisions being taken? And I appreciate that it's NZTA. And why I asked you the question in the beginning is, what input has there been or what discussion around the frustration? Because I've got no visibility at all looking out for the next 3 years on what is likely to happen with Dominion Road with light rail. We've heard a huge amount of discussion, but we don't know with any certainty what is likely to happen. So that's partly why I would like us to have something a little more specific, because it actually might prove to be a useful driver then on some decision making, or perhaps the policy work that will lead to decision making on something where there's just this enormous question mark at the moment. So Mr. Chairman, I'm not wanting to, in any way, I'm not wanting to be vexatious on this. I'm simply wanting to see how we can use these tools that we have in our toolbox as councillors to try and get the outcomes that we would like to see for our region.
I wasn't looking at my phone for any other reason, just to check. So we have a workshop on August the 7th. Maybe that could be could be discussed at that workshop on August the 2nd, could be added onto the agenda. Is that?
We could explore
It's
that.
with
I know that Auckland Transport did want to focus on things like the roading maintenance contracts, but I'll certainly explore that with
Because
Shane
right at the moment, I'm not happy about voting for this because it isn't sufficiently well addressing some of the concerns that I've got for achieving the wider goals, and so that's why I'm raising it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay.
Can I help?
How you vote is an issue, but I'm suggesting this gets added to the agenda for that meeting. Councillor Simpson?
I'd like to help because actually we are voting for an SOI that was supposed to include all the include all the aspects from the resolutions we put up in April, and yet 2 of the points in the resolutions aren't being addressed until August 7. So noting that, I think it would be much easier if we could all vote for the SOIs, noting that this be added to the August 7 workshop, because in actual fact, none of us should vote for the Auckland Transport one because it's not all completed yet. But it will be.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Right, now the list has got longer all of a sudden, so 11 o'clock is an aspiration rather than a reality. We have Councillor Bartley, Darby, Watson, Simpson and Hills, just so you know. So Councillor, one's gone. Councillor Bartley.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question, just curious. How is Auckland Transport saying they need our backing, especially with unpopular projects, stating its activities and intentions?
I'm sorry, Councillor, could you just try and rephrase the question? I'm not sure what you're getting at.
I'm just referring to page 45 in our agenda, where Auckland Transport have said that as Auckland Council's delivery agency for transport services and projects, Auckland Transport needs Council's ongoing support and commitment. Blah, blah, blah. This includes a well-informed backing of council. So that's stating what they need from us. And I'm looking at the Schedule 8 of the Local Government Act, where it says it's about stating their activities and intentions. And I don't see a correspondence between the two. So and if that's the case, then they should remove that statement from the statement of intention.
Yes, gone a little bit beyond what the Local Government Act requires from a statement of intent, but I think if I can interpret what they are looking for there, is that they are saying that Council has set the strategic direction for them, and as they go about delivering that strategic intention around the city and bringing information to you about what its plans and activities are, that Council and Auckland Transport work hand in hand to help inform our communities about those projects and what they're trying to achieve. So it's just a call, I suppose, to say we're all in this together.
Okay. I think it's cheeky. And I think it could be seen to hinder our role in holding them accountable. So, yeah, those are my thoughts about it.
Councillor Darby.
When you've finished questions, you can come to me if you like.
Okay. Councillor Watson, questions or statement? Okay. Councillor Hills, questions or statement?
I guess my question was sort of based on the congestion thing again, because I thought that last year that we had agreed it was more about people movement, not congestion. You can look at the best cities in the world for public transport and they still have heavy congestion on their roads, but they're moving more people through the corridors, which is what we are essentially doing with our buses and other things. So, and that 85 hours yesterday split over the 250 work days is 19 minutes a day. So we have to keep that in consideration. 85 hours sounds horrendous, but I think what we put in last year was the fact it needed to be more about people movement and using corridors better, which is what, things like Mount Eden bus lanes or things like light rail, which will eventually come, is around how we get more people down those corridors. So, yeah, I just worry, but also the whole motorway suggestion. It's largely the on-ramps and motorways that are causing the most congestion. So how we get Auckland Transport to relate back and forth to NZTA, I'm not sure, but we seem to get the brunt of it, even though it's an NZTA issue. But yeah, it's probably not a question for here because I thought that was agreed last year. So,
okay, that was a question statement. Member Wilcox.
Thank you. And now for something completely different. Mangere Mountain Limit. So we received the draft back in February 19. My question is, what are the minor issues that need to be decided? I looked at the Mangere Otahuhu local board corridor, where they wanted some information put in there regarding the schools. But I suppose the big thing comes out from their last audit report was the uncertainty on funding. I mean, how can you plan and give a statement of intent if you actually can't go much past the date of your funding?
Yes, through the chair. So I think essentially they've had the delay has largely been that they've had a bit of turnover on the board, and so they've also quite short on staff. So they're kind of they've been a bit constrained in their ability to even do the sort of basics. And I think the issue that you've identified around the uncertainty of funding is also very pertinent, and that's why we. It's likely that we'll be, as part of the kind of broader work we're doing on our non-substantive or community CCOs, we'll be looking at probably recommending going back to the drawing board about the governance arrangements for the organisation and its future, because I think it just really is highlighting that it's at the moment it's not necessarily working that well. And there's quite a lot of burden falling on what are volunteer trustees.
So further to that, I suppose my question is, on $300,000, really, do we expect them even to print out a statement of intent?
Yeah, and that's another thing as well. So they actually have a board meeting tonight, and we'll be bringing in a paper to you, I think next month, around exempting some of our community CCOs, our smaller ones. And we are actually looking at, we've put that to them, whether they would like to take that up as well, because in our view, the costs of doing the statement of intent far outweigh the actual benefit we get from it for Margaret Mountain Education Trust, because they do not. That's not to say that they're not. They don't need to be held accountable for that funding. They have a funding agreement which is quite specific, which we work with them to develop. So and that funding agreement and the statement of intent act to some degree duplicate each other. So we are looking at that. At that as part of it, but I think it is just recognising that there is a bit of uncertainty for them at the moment, and we're kind of working with them to figure out a way through that with the other partners in the governance arrangement, because that's
So
critical.
just finally, Chair, I understand what you're trying to. This is the only organisation that does anything on the maunga with regard to Māori kaupapa, on any of our maunga whatsoever. I would have thought this was a kaupapa for Tuataki Tini. We underspent by $6.1 million last year, and I just don't understand why we can't get something going there, because for $300,000 you can't even buy a couple of pies and a milkshake nowadays.
Mr. Watson. Yep.
I've just got a few general comments I'd like to make in terms of this notion of, I guess, accountability and performance, which drives the statement of intent. And it's not so much to do with all the words that are in here and all the various sections. It's probably more to do with this short summary statement you made, Ed, and that was at the end to say there's only so much you can do through documents. It's having healthy relationships that are most important. And I think that really gets to the nub of it as far as I'm concerned. All the words are here. It's probably the case with most big organisations, whether it's education, local government, central government. All the words are always there if you want to ever go and search for them. It's the intangible that's a little harder to capture, and that goes to these healthy relationships. And I think specifically in terms of the sections of these statements of intent that are to do with community engagement, communication, perception, probably for want of a better word there, and really, from my view anyway, that the gap between what's written and those real healthy relationships with the community and with councillors that are lacking. And I draw a bit of an analogy here to one of the, which I think has, some semblance of comparison to the council. I think of the state of one of these big NRL clubs at the moment, St George Dragons. They're a big, strong, powerful, well-resourced club, quite a demanding community. They're used to success, they have high expectations, and their team's not delivering, and certainly in terms of their perception. The organisation itself is reasonably complex, like they all are now. You have your coach, i.e. a bit like the mayor. You have your board that governs. You have your different sections, your recruitment, player welfare, etc., and you have the playing squad, and you have your supporters. Now, there's all these different parts of this organisation. In terms of their perception, they're not delivering. They're not doing well. There's call for the first one. The easy target, of course, is always the poor old coach, but it obviously goes way beyond him. But the salient point that I'm really trying to make is that when they analysed this on the TV, this one guy who belonged to the club said, well, who owns this? Who owns responsibility for our performance? Who owns it? And there was no one. There really was no one to go. Everyone was doing their own little bit in their own little silo, but no one was taking responsibility for the performance of the club as a whole. No one was owning up for that. The easy answer, of course, is it's everyone's responsibility. It's the mayor, it's the council, it's the CEOs, it's everyone. And that's an easy answer, but we all know that that doesn't really work because we don't have control over these various parts. So what I would like to see is more, and it's, I don't know if you can capture it in words, is more the sense of this healthy relationship that Ed alluded to. And some of our CCOs have it, well, in my view anyway. Watercare, in my view, they have good relationships with with the councillors. They obviously care about how they're perceived in the community. I see that up in our area where their public engagement, they're genuine. They go out of their way to talk to people, to get people on side. When it comes to educating us, they step us through projects. Their projects invariably are delivered on budget, on time. And to me, they seem to tick all that boxes. It might just be me, but in terms of that accountability, performance, and that perception, for me, they're right up there. I see other parts of our organisation, you know, poor old Auckland Transport are usually an easy mark in this, in terms of who owns the public perception of Auckland Transport, or Panuku, who takes responsibility for their perception in West Harbour or Takapuna, who owns that, and despite all the obstacles that are put in their way, sees that's important and goes to address that. I see, for instance, you know, often in my ward, for instance, there's a complaint often, oh, nothing's happening. Well, there actually is a whole lot of things happening in transport, but the public aren't going to know that because no one even thinks to put up a little sign that they just opened up an extension to the park and ride, 150 spaces, you know, it was a reasonably expensive project. That's what people are complaining about. Do you think people know that that's open? No, they don't, unless they stumble on it by accident. They don't even know it's been opened up. They don't know that Auckland Transport's been listened to them, have invested quite a bit of money in this fairly sizable improvement. They don't know that. Same with other aspects of the work that are done around the ward. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we can go through the documentation, but it's really that intangible relationship that matters, and walking the talk and the feeling you get that this matters to these people. And I'd say, unfortunately, from my perspective, some of our CCOs exhibit that, and you can see it throughout their organisations, and others don't. It's getting the words down, the tick box, everything's there in writing, but the relationships don't work. So, Ed, if you come up with a way to encapsulate that in meaningful words, I, for one, would welcome that. Thank you.
All on you, Ed, and your final comment on page 3 obviously does say that relationships are critical to reinforce formal documents, I suppose. And there's probably a parable there for Coach Goff. Need to watch out. I'll have Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge the team. We've had a number of workshops on this, so Ed and team from the CCO Governance and External Relationships team. Chair, we really have put the blowtorch on these SOIs, the Statement of Intents, more and more. This is where we have, in one part, we have control over the CCOs. So it's good to have these workshops that have contributed to this document. It's sort of interesting hearing the latest thing that is being discussed. The latest thing seems to be congestion. It's just popped up because somebody's read a front page and we've seen the AA material, but this is not a new problem. This didn't pop up. This has been around for some time, and we have addressed it, and we have addressed it primarily through the strategic priorities that we've confirmed for Auckland Transport. And I think they're on page 47. I mean, in essence, congestion is really just a symptom of a multifaceted problem. It's a symptom of our success. The Mayor, you referred to that, the attractiveness of Auckland. We are attracting 50, 60,000 people a year. There's car registrations that were 800 a week. They're now down to 500. A lot of things that are outside of our control, but there's a lot of advocacy to things outside of our control we need to continue with, and that's primarily aimed at government. So some good things that are happening, but you know, when I look at congestion, my congestion this morning, for example, is different to others. My congestion was when my bus that took me to my ferry pulled up in the bus stop outside the ferry terminal, and the bus stop was congested by cars dropping people off, even though there was allocated parking. That was the first congestion. Then I joined a line 100 metres long. There were a lot of people in front of me, behind. The ferry was rather full. I disembarked through a new facility that we've invested in recently and reopened. I think it's 1B or 1C, 1B at downtown. And all the gangways are open except the Fuller's gangplank is not consistent with the broad openings. So there's disconnects. And so this generous new space that allows a really good flow of people is constrained by an operator's shortcoming and something to address. Then I came on to Quay Street and it is heaving with people, pedestrians, and there's pedestrian congestion. That's my experience of congestion. Others who were on the Northern Motorway this morning, they had fog and therefore they had congestion. And on the Southern Motorway last week, we had a lot of rain and therefore there was congestion. There are crashes that on average cause 37-minute delays on the motorway network when there is a crash. That's the average congestion created, 37 minutes of delay. A lot of things outside of our control, but a lot of things within our control that we cannot avoid. So congestion is many and varied, but ultimately what we've got in train is a relentless focus on frequent and active public transport, a relentless focus on encouraging walking and cycling, better utilisation of the existing transport networks, and focusing on good connectivity, the appropriate connectivity in the urban development and regeneration areas. That's everything we are focusing on, and we have got to be relentless now going forward in supporting the budgets that allow Auckland Transport to do that, to alleviate congestion. That's what it is. And so I agree with some speakers who say, yep, we do need to go back and pick up road pricing going forward. We have to, because in some ways we've felt that's a little bit inconvenient, not quite ready, but we have to go back and look at that. The regional parking strategy, there's got to be an all-in willingness to address that. There's got to be an all-in willingness to back Auckland Transport's strategic direction that we confirm for them. Sometimes I sense that although we confirmed it, we relinquish ownership of those resolutions that confirmed it when it is a little inconvenient. And so my ask is that we stay on course to avoid congestion, really amp up our focus on public transport, the walking and cycling connections, the 3 Ps that are identified in this SOI, addressing productivity. That's all about alleviating congestion. The patronage targets and the punctuality targets for public transport. And then probably the one I think I would say is congestion we need to own as well as political leaders. How did we come to this meeting? Now, I know some live in rural areas and there is not the connectivity except by private motor vehicle. I accept that. But many of us, where are we as political leaders in taking public and active transport? What does our hop card account look like over the last 6 months and 1 year? Where were we this morning? Were we the car ahead, or were we in the car that was contributing to congestion? And yet we come here and raise congestion like it's another's problem. And I think it's an all shared problem. And I'm not wanting to make anybody wrong here, by the way. I'm just saying it is about the car we are in, not about the car ahead or the car we've just passed or the one that's in the lane that we want to shift into. It is the car we are in most of the time. So let's own this problem, but let's stay on course for the solution, which is a massive shift to public transport, way beyond where we are, and a big shift towards active transport, walking and cycling. And on that note, to conclude, I note the last paragraph or so of Chair Lester Levy. This will be his last forward in the SOI, and he makes reference to the Mayor of London's transport strategy, which is out for consultation at the moment, that 80% of journeys in London by 2041 are taken by active walking, cycling and public transport. Now that is the congestion buster for this city. We've got to be big and bold in that area, not complaining about the car ahead.
Councillor Darby, we have Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Just on the congestion, you're quite right. Congestion is different everywhere, and in fact, maybe some of us should go and live in each other's homes for a month or two and just understand our congestion, because the congestion out my way, we've now got, you're talking about congestion, we've got T2s and bus lanes up Pekarenga Road. Most people that are actually travelling on the Pekarenga Road are just single people, and if the public transport was working and going to the places that they needed to go to, it would be okay. But for most people out of my community, and if you moved it out to Howard for a wee while, you'd understand, Chris, most people would have to take 3, maybe 4 modes of public transport. So you'd leave at 6 o'clock in the morning, pouring down with rain, trying to get out to Mangere Airport to work. You've had to take four modes of public transport to get there. The reason people are still in cars is the public transport is not working. Until the public transport is working, what we need, if we're going to have public transport that's working, we need to actually have public transport that is going more express buses that are going to destinations, could be going to Middlemore Hospital, going to the airport or wherever. But at the moment, our public transport is really letting us down. I just used public transport last weekend, caught the train from New Lynn into the city with the grandchildren, and we thought we got a bus in, going to get the train back, but the train wasn't working, so we had to go and find another bus somewhere, and just about missed, nearly got a ticket for having a car parked too long because we couldn't get the train that we thought so the public transport is really letting us down, and until such a time that the public transport's working properly, we're going to have cars on the road. It's as simple as that. But I mean, you really have to perhaps live in an area, I mean, where you are, it's nice and easy. You've just got maybe one bus and then you get on the boat and you're okay. But for a lot of people, they have to get 4 modes of public transport, and I really can't see too many of us sitting around this table catching 4 modes of transport to get to work.
Well, that might be the headline tomorrow, Councillor. It would be Councillor suggests spouse swap for councillors. We're actually, and it's so we're just going to have a break because we're just wrestling with an issue here, how we can kind of recognise the August 7 workshop and obviously put all this through. So we're going to have a 5-minute break. We'll come back at just after 1:15. Okay, councillors, when you're ready. Yeah, your name. Yeah. We have a quorum around the table, so we're fine. Councillor Simpson, then Mayor Goff to finish it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I want to congratulate the team for the work they have done, and I was particularly interested in the summary of the fact of the sort of the increase in reporting that we are now having with our CCOs. I think at the end of the day, the people on the street are saying quite often that there is no control in the CCOs, and we are constrained to some degree, but I think the fact that staff themselves have acknowledged that this council term we have worked harder to get that, or tighter, I should say, in getting that reporting done is to be congratulated. I also want to thank Auckland Transport for their willingness to, well, not their willingness, they have to really, but their incorporation of the April resolutions into their SOI, and the other CCOs for, again, tightening up their reporting back to us. However, Mr. Chairman, I will be abstaining on the Auckland Transport Statement of Intent, and it's on a process issue only. One of the recommendations in the April workshop was that Auckland Transport's final statement of intent include the outcome of a workshop which covered 7 issues. They haven't been completed. That workshop is on August the 7th. I also take note of Councillor Bartley's comments around the way Auckland Transport are saying in their statement of intent we should behave with regards to selling issues, inverted commas, to our communities. And I think this point will be expanded on more in the governing body meeting, I think it's item 9 on the 25th of July. So I believe that when that August 7th workshop is completed, the resolutions will be correct and the statement of intent will be correct. And I think when Thursday's meeting in the governing body, you'll get a better attitudinal governing body, local board, Auckland Transport relationship. So to that extent, I don't want to vote against it, but I'll abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just reflecting on what we're doing today, the first step in this process was the letter of expectations, and I circulated that around every councillor, got feedback. We sent our letter in. We then got the CCO's statements of intent, and on the 16th of April, all of us sat down together and we worked out what we wanted to change. Everybody had a fair go to put forward proposals for change. We then, through our officers, sent those changes back to the CCOs, and today we've had a report back from our officers that they have adopted all of the changes that we have recommended. So that's where we are in process terms. We had the opportunity on the 16th of April to say, this is what we wanted. We did that. We sent it. They said, that's what you want. That's what we'll incorporate into our statement of intent. And now it's back with us. So this is not the time where we change what we've already decided on the 16th of April, but it is a time to reflect on how good the statement of intent process is overall. And the feedback again that we've got from Ed, that the SOIs over his time on council have become more strategic, more specific. He's given us examples of how they are working better. But the other point that's been made around the table is that the SOIs are simply one aspect of holding the CCOs accountable. And, you know, I pick up John Watson's point. I think it's absolutely right, and it's also Ed's point. It's also about the relationships and how we work it. So it's how effective we are in terms of dealing with the CCOs when they come with their quarterly report and their annual report. It's about the people that we put on to the boards of each of those CCOs. Because if we don't like what they're doing, we've got to look at why we made the decision to appoint those people. And we are looking at making some changes on those boards to emphasise, for example, the accountability and responsiveness aspect. I'm looking at right now in terms of who we appoint to be the chair, the new chair of Auckland Transport. And further down the track, we'll have another go at how to improve this process. This isn't our last bite at the cherry, but one of the things we've got to consider is the structural changes that would require legislative change, and that's why I've been talking to government about how we can get their concurrence with the review that we do, step back 10 years on from CCOs, review what the CCOs have achieved, what they haven't achieved, what's working, what's not working, what we need to change, and whether we need legislative change to do that. And that will become part of the process, I think, next year as well. We've got diverted onto the question of congestion, but I think everybody recognises that AT is one player in that, and they recognise that it is a problem with congestion. I welcome the AA report to say that it hasn't got worse in the last 2 years, although it feels worse to me on the roads that I drive on. And I welcome the fact that actually what we decided with the ATAP program last year is putting 50% more money. We've gone from $20 billion in the LTP to $29 billion that goes to ATAP. So we've increased it by nearly 50%. That will make a difference. And, the stuff that Councillor Darby has talked about and we've put in our Auckland plan, we all know that building more motorways isn't going to be the answer. It's around all of the other things, a better functioning public transport system, and we can celebrate the advances and say, yes, we've still got a lot more to go. But that's a much wider question than simply the SOI. So what we're doing today, just to summarise, Mr Chair, we've put the suggestions in through our officers at the end of the table, and thank you, folk, for the work that you've done on that. The CCOs have come back dutifully and said, that's what you want, that's what we've incorporated, and now we vote to support the SOI that we have framed in that way. That's what we're doing today. Is that the end of the process in terms of accountability and responsiveness? No, it's simply one step along the way. Thank you.
Okay, well, I have the resolutions up there, so let's move on in a second. So I'll put A, B, C, D, E, and we're noting that you want to abstain, so I'll put the resolution.
I'd like to take the transport out of the
Okay, how are we going to do that? Okay, all right, well, we'll do A by division and then you'll just note against it, yep. Okay, so we'll do A by division.
Isn't it just transport?
Oh, we're going to pull transport out, are we? Okay.
Sorry, Mr Chair, what we'd normally do in this situation, by way of point of order, if I can make this point, often there are councillors that are not in favour of a particular thing, but don't we just usually record their name as not supporting that, unless a division is called for, of course?
That's what I floated. That's what I floated. But
Mr Chairman, speaking through you, yes, I'd be happy to do that, but I want to make it very clear that it's specific to.
No, that's fine. And I think we can do that.
okay, right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go A, B, C, D, E. Do you still want the division? No. No. So we're just going to note. Okay. So we're just going to record. We're going to record. Yep. And we've got Councillor Simpson and Councillor Fletcher. Okay, so all those in favour, and Councillor Stewart. And we've got Sharon as well. Okay, all those against, and we're noting the 3 votes against. Councillor Simpson, you just want an abstention. No, I did A, B, C, D, E there. So. Okay, so there's two votes against. There's 2 votes against and 1 abstention against, specifically about the Auckland Transport. Okay, right. We are now moving on to item number 10. Thank you, team. Thank you, Ed. And team. Yeah. Right, we have Ross and we have Deanna. And Deanna is where? Deanna is there. Hi. And Claire, is it? Yep, Claire's coming back. Yep. Who's leading off? Deanna or Ross?
I'll lead off.
Okay.
So just firstly, introductions. You'll know Claire. Some of you may know Deanna. Deanna is an analyst that works in the area of business case processes and project management processes for Auckland Council. So it's quite relevant to this particular policy. So this group business case policy forms the last of a suite of 5 group financial policies that you requested about 2.5 years ago. We've worked through all the other ones, treasury policies, procurement policies, etc. And the last one is the group business case policy. So where we've got to in the process is we've developed the draft policy. We've spoken to all of the CCOs, got feedback from them at a management level. It hasn't travelled through the CCO boards yet. So today we're asking you to endorse the draft policy and then delegate to the chair and the group CFO approval to finalise the policy, reflecting any comments that come back from the CCO boards. So the policy itself is 2 pages. It's in the agenda there. It is a very high-level, principle-based approach. So it tries to set what are the key principles, how do we think about business case information, how can it come forward, how can it promote better value for money for ratepayers. So you'll see in the business case policy 5 principles that are set out. The other parts of the policy, there's a section on minimum standards. So what that's doing really is just setting a very clear expectation that all major investment through projects and programs should follow good business case disciplines. It talks about alignment to better business case methodology, which is international best practice. It's what the federal government has used via the New Zealand Treasury. We have our own Auckland Council interpretation of the better business case standards, but it's very similar, very much aligned to that national and international best practice. So just a clear expectation that all investment all material investment across the group should follow good project management disciplines and that better business case framework, while also acknowledging that in the case of Auckland Transport, they do need to follow NZTA business case methodology as well. And then the last part of the policy refers to effective governance. So this is, I guess, about setting some clear expectations about how and when should business case information come through to the governing body or a committee such as this of the governing body. So in there it sets out some very clear expectations that a committee or the governing body acting through the chair can request business case information when and to support a decision that needs to be made by the governing body or that committee. So what this policy doesn't do is it doesn't change any decision-making rights. It doesn't provide anything over and above the existing CCO governance framework. What it does is tries to set some very clear expectations about the information that can come forward to help you when you need to make those decisions. It talks about relevant information and then gives some sort of principles around, well, what is the relevant information that's required, and it talks about some kind of thresholds there in terms of the significance and engagement policy. So certain investments become significant decisions under that policy. So, for example, we've looked at, if RFA want to spend $50 to $100 million, say, or something of that investment, investing in a new stadium development, we've assessed that would meet the triggers for significance. That means that the council would need to consult with the public on that and budget as part of an annual budget or long-term plan process. And we're saying when things meet that kind of level of significance, then you should expect to get good business case information. So that might be information around what are the options, what are the costs, what are the cost-benefit assessment, what are some of the major risks. It talks about, in the policy, there's a few other bullet points, things like, well, what is the degree of public interest, what is the quantum of public investment? And those are the sort of criteria to think about, well, when should business case information come through to support you to make decisions? So and here we talk about decisions such as when you make funding decisions. So, for example, when you are making a funding provision in an annual budget, a long-term plan, or also where you are making as the shareholder of the CCOs, you're giving shareholder approval for some transaction. So again, those are the decisions that this committee would already make, or the governing body would already make, and the policy just tries to set some clear expectations about what type of business information should come through when. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ross. And if you're looking down under 8, relevant policies and documents, if you go down to the 5th one, it's in brackets where it refers to an alignment with the Treasury standards. So long as, and that one below that is mentioning NZTA BCA standards. So I have Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I guess mine's, you've got the principles here, but we know so often that we'll do a business case and then it costs often quite an eye-watering amount, and it's always hard to understand why it costs so much, though I do acknowledge that smart people need to be paid decent amounts of money and you need time to do it. But what we see quite often is a business case is done, there's no money, that hangs around for 5 years, and then we go, oh, we need to do another business case. And so when you look at, say, principle 4 about efficiency, you know, not costing more, time delays, and another one, principle 1 about promote value for money. How do we kind of measure that where we don't want to do these things too early, but that kind of chicken and egg thing of you've got to do one to see whether you've got enough money for that, but then you end up doing it again? Because I think that's something that we seem to hear all the time, and I don't think it's efficient.
Yes, I think those principles you've talked about are articulated here. I guess all we're doing for this policy is committing to those principles and trying to give that bit of profile. It is a difficult balancing act around how much time do you invest investing in business casing and doing all your homework up front versus getting on and doing the job. I guess we know that there's countless examples of project failures around the world where people haven't done enough homework up front and have come unstuck and quite spectacularly and when they try and deliver things. So yes, it is a difficult balance. I guess we have there are business case processes that go around these things. This is so often you'll do a strategic assessment, do a little bit of, you do the initial assessment, then as you get further along, get closer to procurement, you do more and more work as you go. So if it stacks up, you move to the next phase.
Yeah, so are you saying that really, what's efficient is to do the business case when you actually are much closer knowing that you've got the funding to do it, rather than let's see how much it's going to cost and let's see if we can do it?
Well, for example, for major infrastructure projects, the Treasury has a whole framework around this stuff where you start off with a strategic assessment. Is it a good idea? Do we think it makes sense? Then you go into a high-level business case, then you move into a detailed business case. So if at any point it's not stacking up, you stop or revisit. And if it is stacking up, then you move through the process. Yeah.
Councillor Cooper, that's a good point, and I think Councillor Hulse and myself and yourself, and I noticed Mr. Dragicevic at the back there, often business cases are created by tack-on resolutions where people go away, where the staff are then obliged to go away and investigate something, and everyone knows it's going to be ages away, but tack-on resolutions can often cause issues. And I do remember when the amalgamation of the Super City at Waitakere, and I was Chair of Finance, and when we went through, I think we wiped out over $1 billion worth of projects that were so far out ahead that they just weren't necessary in order to get the wish list right down to something more realistic at the time of the amalgamation. So I think it often is up to us at times who create a lot of the extra inefficiency and expenditure. Councillor Hills.
Thank you. Yeah, I think obviously it's good to have policy and principles, but I do have, unless I'm missing the detail, but I do get worried about the business case where the line is around decision making, especially around things like the One Local initiatives, or maybe it's replacing something in a park, or something a local board has said we want to do this, and then suddenly we do a business case, and often you're looking at a business case of 30, 40,000 for an item that may be 200,000, and it just seems a little. So it's good to. I hope this kind of reduces that, and maybe there's scope for a business case of a collective number of items, or a general yes, we support playgrounds, or yes, we support wharfs. I don't know what it is, but it seems sometimes that we are over business casing, and like others have said around, doing a business case in 5 years, the issues you used are no longer there. So it's probably more of a comment than a question, but I am just a bit worried that we use it as not a delay tactic. It's good to have the evidence behind why we're doing something and the need to spend ratepayers' money wisely, but sometimes I wonder if the business case could be 25% of the end item. It seems a little bit frivolous. If the community wants something, the local board have democratically said, we need this, then we should just design the item and do it rather than. So I guess if you've got any feedback of how that's going to work, or.
I'll just say that we've got those principles captured clearly here about efficiency, value for money, and business cases being fit for purpose. So the intention and the principles are there, and making it work in practice is always the challenge. We do have within Auckland Council, we have frameworks and guidance to kind of give to help in that space. We've done a lot of work with the community facilities team recently to try to improve processes and practice in that space. Was there anything you wanted to add, Steve?
Just get Matthew wishes to just add. Oh, sorry, Deanna, did you want to say something? No?
Well, so just through the chair, so it's a good question. I think it's very well put. It is a balancing act, but I think principle number 4 is important, and it's inviting our staff, along with yourselves, to just continue to ask questions about what's fit for purpose. If we're spending $40,000 on an asset that might be $100,000, then we need to be questioning why we're doing that. So I think the principle's well framed. I've got no doubt we'll learn as we go, and there's probably some good practice and some poor practice, but this makes the principle clear. So we should work towards being good at balancing when something is of such an item that really good, rigorous, and possibly quite expensive analysis is required, and maybe when it's not, and when we need to trust and back smaller teams who are doing this stuff all the time. But I think this is encouraging us to know what that looks like and work in that way.
Yeah, I guess definitely with me, if we could have the departments having a bit more flexibility to just go, yep, that's the type of stuff that in the plans and places, or in the Auckland plan, or in the, I can't think of off the top of my head, but yep, that's the type of stuff we do. Sports fields are good, move on, as opposed to jumping straight to a business case because maybe departments think they have to, or they're going to have to prove backwards, when sometimes it's just, oh, that's added another year and another 40 grand and cost escalation to that. And we just got back to the same answer that was, yes, it's a much needed item for the community. I understand a 10 million, 20 million, $1 billion project absolutely needs a business case, but I do get a bit worried that we jump sometimes straight to that. But that sounds good if we're not going to always do that.
Deanna, you were going to say something?
Just with those smaller projects, I think we do look at some of the smaller projects within Council Parent as quite individual pieces of work. So what we're working on at the moment is to bring those up to a higher level where we do business case. So we look at across a range of parks, what outcomes are we trying to achieve, what benefits do we want, and then the business case process allows us to look at options to achieve that and really define the scope. That helps our project managers actually, make good choices in terms of when issues come up in delivering those projects. They know what outcomes they need to achieve and can come back to the right governance for future decisions, further decisions.
Yep. Thank you. I have Councillor Darby, Cashmore, Collins and Newman.
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you for your work here. And the devil's always going to be in the application of this. So it's it's a good policy, and then we need to make sure it actually hits the ground and shows up. So that's where my area of concern is. So I'm very aware of indicative business cases which are almost deliberately missing things to ensure that, you know, you look at an apparent positive indicative business case, but once you get that across the line and you're sort of committed, you know, and then you go into developed and detailed business cases, and then you really start to unpick the things that you should have looked at in your indicative business case. So I'm just wanting some confidence that this is actually going to lead to a more robust process around the indicative early stage business case as well as the developed and detailed business case. The other area, and I'll ask all my questions in one lot, Chair, I'd imagine, probably following on from what Councillor Hills is saying, there's probably a need for simplified business case for low value procurement. But then I've got some concerns. Just a week before last at Councillor Hulse's committee, we had a board procure some external services that didn't even go through their local board staff. It was almost like a political procurement. And I want to see that in a report. I want to see that if we've got this business case policy in place, I'd like to see in black and white that the policy has not been followed, if it hasn't been followed. I was at a board meeting last week, and on the back of members' reports, not business reports, there were financial allocations being made. And I think we need to look at that, because it's those tens of thousands of dollars multiplied by hundreds of times that add up to significant quantums of public money. So my question here is about application, where I started. The devil is there. How is it going to show up so that decision makers are alerted to a lack of good business policy, business case policy, not, you know, being undertaken, not being undertaken, so it can be really clear. And what happens on the management side when a political decision is made that has not followed the policy? Does a red flag go up, and does it go back to higher management who are obliged to pick that up? Even though the decision's been made, pick it up and flag it and look at how that was arrived at. If you get my gist.
Yes, so except the policy's only going to do so much. We see getting the policy in place is an important first step, and then we can work on all of those processes and practices to give effect to it. I guess once we have a group policy that's been endorsed by a committee and has been travelled through the CCO boards, that gives us quite a strong mandate to talk about compliance and non-compliance for that policy. At the moment, we don't have that. It's just kind of all we can talk about is our opinion on what good practice looks like. So having the principles and policy in place gives us a good anchor to then let us start working on all those things that you've talked about. So yes, there's a lot more work to do. I think this is an important first step. I think where we see non-compliance with the policy, that is certainly something that we will flag up through to senior management and deal with. But we've got to have a clear policy in place first to enable that.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Ross. My question is along the lines, I've got a little bit of scepticism around this stuff from the business sector. I've seen how these things are accountants' dreams and actual constructors' nightmares. However, willing to see the policy proceed, but I want to know, when is the business case policy going to have a business case put over it? So checking it out against small, medium and large size projects. When's the review time? And I want to see the measure of extra delivery because of this business case process.
Yeah, so we see it as it's a work in progress. We see this has been reviewed from time to time, and we'd want to track and check compliance and check is it adding value. I mean, in the policy it talks about being fit for purpose, having been efficient. So we kind of we see it as it's a work in progress. It needs to be monitored and updated. This might be the first policy. There may be many iterations that we can do more and more to add better value as we go forward.
Councillor Collins, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. I had a question. I'm not sure if I've got the process right here as to when this question might be useful. We've seen the government take a well-being approach to their budget, and I'm thinking about the 4 well-beings that with local government, and I'm wondering, as far as the principles are concerned, where you believe some of those well-beings around social, economic, environmental, and cultural outcomes can be seen in these principles. They're not clearly defined or outlined, and I know that's probably not part of the scope that you took. I'm just wondering if we're moving in that direction, not that we should be following where the government's leading, but it would be nice to kind of get a sense of how those outcomes will be achieved in the principal part of how we prepare business cases.
Yeah, sure, that's a great question. The way we see this coming through is that in the business case policy, the key parts are looking at the strategic alignment. Does the proposal, the initiative, the project meet with strategic objectives? So the more well defined the strategies are in terms of achieving different outcomes, the easier it is to do a strategic assessment against those outcomes. And the other piece is in the benefits, particularly in the benefits assessment. I know that a lot of the work central government have done is in terms of their living standards framework and in the wellbeing budget. They kind of recognise that a lot of the assessment of projects was very much fully focused on the economics. Does the cost benefit in an NPV sense stack up? So they were very much focused on, well, how can we bring in other dimensions other than just the economic and financial dimensions? And that was kind of the genesis of the living standards framework and broader wellbeing. So we kind of see this isn't going to define all that for us and move us into the wellbeing space, but it does mean that if we can make progress in terms of moving towards broader wellbeings, clearer strategies, then the business case processes can give effect to that much more effectively.
Great. So supplementary to that, Chair, and I'm not sure if it's a question for the officers or for us to go and think about, is at some stage will we see an idea of what your assessment tool, some kind of template as to how we'll see those 4 well-beings, granted the living standards framework that many of us would have read and had a look at?
Yeah, so we're starting to think about the next long-term plan and to what extent can some of those concepts form some of the thinking for the next long-term plan, because that is the point where the council needs to consider a whole range of competing demands and come to some key trade-off decisions. So we see that as the key.
Councillor Newman.
Good morning. Yeah, look, a couple of questions from me. I mean, I won't be voting for A because I think that, to be frank, there's more information that's needed here. So, what happens when you have, for example, a CCO like Auckland Transport, which contributing to this process? They've got a project which actually is a project with multiple components. Some of it might be about renewal of an asset. Some of it might be about a change in the level of service over and above that asset. And something might actually, a component of that might be responding to growth. Actually, the renewal and the growth component actually really shouldn't be subject to a business case. That should be business as usual. But if there's a change in the level of service, it would seem to me that it triggers a business case argument. So what is the threshold? Because the thresholds are very important. I absolutely agree with what Richard Hill said. What is the threshold here for when this policy has to be triggered? That's the first question.
So the policy is very principle based. It doesn't set very definitive thresholds and a dollar amount. It talks about business cases being fit for purpose and acknowledging that the size, the risk around individual initiatives. I guess in the renewal space, we would see asset management plans as sort of being the key driver of where the analysis takes place that justifies what's the right level of spend and investment in renewals and maintenance. It should provide all of the evidence, assess options, and consider the benefits through the development of the asset management plan. Where it's invested in something new, different, responding to growth, an asset management plan may not necessarily cover that, so more work is may be required to consider what are the risks, options, benefits, risks around the other dimensions that are broader than renewals. So the business case policy doesn't go into a lot of the detail, but it sets clear expectations that there should be good, effective, fit for purpose business cases across all areas of major spend.
I and all councillors sat in a meeting of the Environment and Community Committee recently where projects worth millions of dollars which had previously been agreed by local boards and the governing body through a long-term plan process around OLIs, were then subject to what appeared to be 10 months worth of indicative business case work with analysis and ideas and recommendations, most of which were noted, and then we just carried on what we were intending to do. So what value did that exercise add to this other than making some consultants princely some money?
Yeah, I can't comment on the specific projects. If there's a business case, work done, and nothing changes, that may just simply mean we've confirmed that we're on the right track and that we've de-risked things along the way. But in terms of the individual projects and what's changed or happened there, we need Auckland Transport people to comment on the specifics.
When will you have more information about the thresholds? Because you're talking about this as a principles exercise, but it seems to me the principles suddenly become the gateway, and the gateway then becomes a very difficult discussion around this table because we want it to go through the gate. But your best advice in your business case is that it shouldn't go there. So when will we have better information about the thresholds to go beyond the principle? Because without that information, it seems to me this is a Trojan horse, and I'm not comfortable with that.
It's been difficult.
Yeah, so the policy sets out, the principles and the intentions. So we can do more work with Auckland Transport to clarify the operation over time, and we can, at an appropriate time, bring back to you some progress update on how things are tracking in that space, or it can be part of the quarterly performance discussions. There is a workshop with Auckland Transport in early August. It will focus on, I believe it will cover the transport OLIs in particular. Some of the questions may be relevant there.
But isn't it the case, though, that this is your document, your policy for the CCOs? It's not Auckland Transport. I mean, Auckland Transport's just trying to get on with addressing our needs. This is your product, your baby, and I'm just wondering, I've just raised Auckland Transport as one example, but you could probably look at all sorts of CCOs. I don't think it's about them refining this. I'm just wondering about the value add of what you're talking about. Because I just want them to do their job. I think they're doing their job. I'm just wondering what sort of job you're doing.
So this just, as I said, sets out the high-level principles and policies. As one of the Auckland Council's group financial policies, there is a requirement for CCOs to act in a manner consistent with these group policies. So in the CCO accountability policy, there is a requirement that CCOs follow this, give effect to it. So we see this as effectively an enforceable group policy. Auckland Transport will have to work out, what that means. How do they give effect to this at a more detailed level? And maybe just ask Claire if there's anything she wants to add from CCO governance perspective.
I think this, as Ross has mentioned, this does ask that the appropriate level of business case is undertaken and that the CCO board principle 3, looks at that and determines what level is appropriate. It's not up to the council to make that decision-making right or to necessarily set some of those thresholds for their business activity. It is up to the council's right to say, we expect you to have done an appropriate business case and to provide us with the information should we need it to make a funding or a significant funding decision. And so that's the limit of where the policy goes in that respect.
So can I just add as well, through the chair, so to be clear, and it's a group policy, so you'll appreciate we've had some reasonable level of dialogue already with CCOs who, not unreasonably, you could imagine, will talk about some unique aspects of their business. So we're trying to find the balancing point here. But to be clear, no, so the policy is not prescriptive. We've not specifically turned our minds to thresholds because that gets pretty hard. You could invite us to, and we could think about it. We think that would be hard to develop, but I understand the question. But what the policy does do, which I think Claire's just articulated, it's largely setting expectations, and it's making, you know, your rights to set those expectations very clear. The practice you expect CCOs and management within the council to follow. And we haven't spent a lot of time on this, but there's also an element under 6, which also makes the process by which you can explicitly request additional information very clear.
All right. Glenn, sorry, Member Wilcox.
Yeah. Can you explain what the Māori impact statement means to me, please? Or not means to me, what it means.
So what we mean there is if we have good business case processes and disciplines, that require across the group, all organisations to consider what are the costs, benefits, impacts, what is the impact on all the relevant stakeholders, then that creates more of an opportunity to make sure that questions around the impact on Maori outcomes, Maori wellbeing can be addressed and should be addressed through business cases. So it's just saying adopting this policy in itself doesn't give rise to any specific Maori impacts, outcomes, but it creates a platform for those impacts to be better considered. So, for example, if Watercare is looking at a major wastewater initiative, it creates good business case disciplines would suggest they should consider all of the impacts on all the relevant parties.
Yeah, okay, look. Look, I just, with Māori impact statements, I really need something a bit more than just there would be no impact on Māori, because there is an impact on Māori, and I want to see in an impact statement, Chair, is some alignment with the issues of significance that the statutory board puts out for council. I mean, however, following good business case practice will lead to better outcomes for our community. That's not a Māori impact. That's just an impact for all Aucklanders. And so I suppose I'm looking for something a little bit more, and I'm looking for a bit more depth in this Māori impact statement, because the reality is when it comes to business case, a lot of times we forget about the engagement policy 2014. And that is not often that gets kind of lost in these business case kaupapa. I know we're talking about dollars and cents, but Māori are equally interested in dollars and cents. So, Chair, I'd just like to point that out, that I think this impact statement actually doesn't tell me anything about the impact for Māori and how that can help them in those processes. Thank you.
All right, so we have the motions. I've got an indication that Councillor Newman's going to vote against, so we're going to note that. We've got a mover and a seconder. You want to speak to it? Okay.
Look, we've got the local board plans. It's a statutory exercise. Those local board plans are subject to consultation around identifying what local needs are. We've got the annual plan and the long-term plan consultation requirements. They are statutory requirements that we spend a lot of time doing that engagement. We've got the statement of intent. The statement of intent sets out the requirements of the shareholder for the CCOs to follow. We've got letters of expectations. We've got the asset management plans. The asset management plan should identify what it is that we need to be maintaining, the assets that we need to be maintaining, where they are, the standards, and when we will renew them. We've got the development contributions policy that sets out the projects that will be subject to growth funding to meet need, when they will be funded, where they will be funded. The Mayor's got the value for money section 17A review. That's an exercise that's been going on since we started. I think that we get to the point where we just try and policy ourselves to the point where we're achieving something that I think is pretty well stated. And yes, we can have a principles exercise, but I do think that there is, I do worry about the fact that there isn't some sort of clarification as to when this won't apply, because I actually don't think this needs to apply much at all. So, and Glenn's dealt with the issue of Māori impact. So for those reasons, Chair, if you could just please note that I won't be voting for A, because I'm not convinced that this is appropriately scoped for adding value. Of course, we want to ensure that we've got good business case disciplines to ensure value for money and to support effective decision making. Effective decision making and ultimately a determination of our constituents. And I'd like to think that most of the judgments made, not all the judgments, but that's an opinion, most of the judgments made are the right judgments, and those judgments didn't necessarily require a comprehensive suite of analysis for what needed to happen. It needed to happen a long time ago. Often half the argument is, well, why didn't we do some of this capital works years ago, because we're actually miles late. Thank you.
Right, we have a mover and a second. I'm going to put the A, B and C. We're noting Councillor Newman. All those in favour? Aye. Against? And we've got Councillor Newman against, and it's noted. Right, we just then have item, thank you, Deanna, Claire and Ross. We just have item number 11, moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Cashmore. Any discussion of anything there? No, I'll put that. All those in favour? Aye. Against? All good. And there is no extraordinary business, and I will therefore declare the meeting closed. So we will just have another brief break while we get the other team up for the Ollies.